Mako, can I say hello? Welcome. We know each other. We have gone back way too long.
I know.
We were both Bucknellians together, weren't we?
Just 1 year.
Just 1 year. We didn't know each other, did we, though?
We did not. You were somewhere in the corner in a fraternity. I was banished in the animal behavior and art barn.
Well, arguably we each were with monkeys then, huh?
Arguably, that is true. Yes, and I have to deal with it. And, trustee now, my fiduciary responsibility will extend to both sides.
That's great. Well, we were talking about coming up. We are good friends and have known each other and our families for quite some time. So it's always a treat to do that. For Mako, it's probably a risky adventure because I know stories that I'm not going to tell. But we will have a candid discussion about how do you connect, if you think of the Christian tradition, Sunday to Monday, or the Jewish tradition, Saturday to Monday. How do you do that? These deep values that we think and talk about, can they even exist, let alone flourish in the marketplace? And Mako and I have had these fascinating conversations over the years of his domain as an artist and my domain before academia being in the marketplaces. What's it mean to be a successful artist? What's it mean to be a successful investment banker, just to pick one of many professions, or in technology? And what constantly surprises me is how similar our worlds are, as opposed to being very different. I mean, would you agree that there's more similarities than we might have thought?
Yeah, I think over time we learned to expect that in our conversations. But initially, it was we got to know each other in various places where there was a marketplace, a conference, or some kind of a cultural overlap, and. But as we got to know each other, it is remarkable that we actually live parallel lives, and there's important conversation overlap between the two worlds.
Yeah. Did you notice, by the way, we each wore our work uniforms today? Who's who? Who's the artist? So, Mako, let's just roll back a couple years. Who's the young Mako who's born in Boston, and yet you're bicultural? Paint a little bit of a picture of your growing up in your family before we jump into some of these contemporary questions.
So I was born in Boston. My father, who recently passed away, was doing his postdoc work at MIT with a guy named Noam Chomsky. He brought the generative theory, grammar theory into Japan, and that's his. He taught at Tokyo University, which is the elite university of Japan. And so I grew up in this very creative environment. I went to grade school in Kamakura, Japan, which is the 12th century capital of Japan, and amazing place.
So Japanese was your native tongue, is your native tongue?
Japanese is my native tongue, and I came over at the age of 13 to go to middle school and high school in New Jersey, and I could not speak English that well. And even at Bucknell, I remember struggling through my first year. So that I thoroughly bicultural, and that gave me a kind of a vantage point. I knew that I was an artist very early on.
Like how old?
As much back as I can remember. Really? But I thought everybody was an artist. So, then I went to middle school and found out that that wasn't the case. But I felt there was this deep, and I didn't have a Christian faith growing up. So my parents were not Christians. So they,
were they Buddhist or Shinto, or just really nothing?
No, it's typical agnosticism. Japanese tend to align themselves in one religion or another, but it doesn't really mean much in terms of internalized faith. So it took me a while to get to that. Actually, Bucknell had a very important place in that journey. But
the journey of faith.
Journey of faith in a way that is certainly not direct, but there were pointers.
Do you mind if I ask, or?
So I'm studying this liberal arts interdisciplinary curriculum, and majoring in art and animal behavior.
Art and animal behavior.
Yeah, the opposite kind of the, but two, the first in the catalog, so I just selected the first two. But what ended up happening was because Bucknell is such a place that allows this, I was able to graduate with a creative writing minor. And I took many literature classes, and particularly classes of Dr. Michael Payne, who was a legendary lecturer of Shakespeare at Bucknell. And he recently passed away, and I was able to have many conversations with him about how my faith journey was predicated upon some of the classes that I took. Now, I had no idea that he was a man of faith. I didn't know that the classes he taught on Shakespeare and Milton and William Blake would lead me into faith. Literally, I was reading William Blake when I became a Christian. So I was able to share that with him, and we had a very meaningful, intimate conversation before he passed away. But so liberal arts education, I really believe, has a way of drawing you to the center, whether that ends up your faith journey or not. It allows for that important conversation to take place.
Right. And since we're on that theme, if you don't mind, how did you quote unquote become a Christian? For some people, that's even strange language. I was born a Christian and I'm baptized. What do you mean become a Christian?
Yeah, when I was reading William Blake, right? Yeah. So it started in college, and I began to look both at who I was, being an artist myself. I really wanted to know where this self-expression came out of, and I was having trouble locating it. Actually, the more I focused on myself, the less I could find myself. So this became
essentially the more I focused on myself, the less I could find myself. Interesting.
Yeah. So this is a problem of contemporary art. Actually, is that it's so based on self-expression that unless you have a very strong ego and you can live with that ego, which is difficult to do, and also it can force you to wear these masks that is not authentic, but you have to do it in order to be an artist or be successful in any endeavor, actually.
So what would an example of an artist's mask be? Someone who has a huge ego and is really just all about self-expression. What one of those masks look like?
Well, so a great example is at the Washington National Gallery, there was this great exhibit of self-portraits of two artists, one Picasso, the other Rembrandt. Picasso's self-portraits, at the end of his life, Picasso, who was full of talent and undoubtedly one of the greatest artists of the 20th century, but was full of ego. That's all he was. At the end of his life, he disappears. There's nothing left. Rembrandt, on the other hand, lost everything. His career, his family, at the end of life, he had nothing. And his last self-portrait is his greatest self-portrait. It literally glows with inner light, peace, joy. And so you compare the two, and you see distinctly two paths for an artist. One, pursuing your ego, self-expression, fame, fortune, everything of who you are.
During his life,
Yes, in Picasso's case. But in Rembrandt's case, he indeed lost everything, and yet he gained something that. So I compare the two, and I say, which one do I want? Right? And I decided that Rembrandt, that path of faith, path of light, is what I wanted to have. Yeah.
It reminds me, there's two passages in the New Testament that always vex me because they seem to be saying the opposite things. At one point, Jesus says to his early followers, pick up, first says, my yoke is light, my burden is light. Mm-hmm. It's easy, come along. Okay, and then there's another passage that says, pick up your cross and die daily. And there's this sense, even Jesus talks about the kenosis, this emptying of himself.
And this
does that connect to this at all?
Yeah, so this is what William Blake talks about in the end of his epic poem, Jerusalem, which is some 400 pages long, so you can go and read that tonight. And at the end, there's this beautiful encapsulation of Gospel of John, Jesus on the cross, and Albion, one of his emanations, imitating Jesus on the cross. And Jesus talks about this love, and he says, wouldst thou love one who never died for thee, or ever love one that has not died for thee?
Would you say that again?
Wouldst thou love one who has not died for thee, or ever die for one who has not died for thee? So he's defining love to me in a radically new way. Love is not just emotion or erotic feelings, or sentiment, but it is in fact willingness to die for that love, for that
sort
someone.
Of a sacrificial component.
And more importantly, that I would not understand or even come close to understanding this love if it wasn't shown to me first. That somebody must die for me in order to understand that the sacrificial love, what the agape love is meant to be only possible if somebody did not enact that love for you. And that's when it hit me that if there was this figure of Jesus who historically have proven that over and over, that this sense of giving away yourself begins a journey of finding yourself or finding your identity, that our egos are in fact this false self that we wear masks to cover, and yet our true identity is hidden in this Christ figure. And so that allegiance, the transfer of allegiance, what I call it took place when I was reading that passage, and I realized, oh my goodness, if Jesus is who he said he was, he did die for me, to show me, to open my eyes to see truly what love is, which I couldn't carry on myself, or even see myself.
That's a mind-boggling concept, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is, and I didn't know that I had become a Christian at that point. It took me a year or two.
I mean, you didn't get any lightning bolts or
no,
music,
but I did have this vision of God.
And I don't mean to be teasing at it.
No. It wasn't this dramatic thing, but I started to see God in different ways through an artist's eye. Because I'm trained to tap into my intuition, to be able to bring out something that is internalized, and that was the first moment where I felt like I was being lifted out of myself. That I didn't have to find it; it found me.
Wow.
So I was kind
That's
of
extraordinary.
It's almost like gravity, reversed. And I'll never forget that.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. I'd also use this phrase, transfer of allegiance.
Yes.
It's also you sort of slid that in. Sort of, is it about looking out for number one, myself, or saying I'm signing up for a different way of living my life, which is extraordinary.
Right. Yeah.
I suspect, with the exception of your reference to your artistic training, everything you just said could apply if you're in the hedge fund business.
Absolutely.
Could apply if you're in sales, if you're in marketing, if you're in finance, if you're in manufacturing, if you're in high tech.
Yeah.
I won't ask how many of you here have different masks you wear at work, but I suspect, myself included, we have lots of masks. And some are understandable and I think appropriate, but others were we're pretending.
Yeah, and in fact, before that passage, Albion, the emanation who struggles with self-identity, and actually he represents England, but he says, my selfhood cruel marches against thee to Jesus, deceitful to meet thee in his pride. So my selfhood cruel marches against thee, which is a profound one-liner there that captures that sense of wearing that mask, and our egos, are driven to be cruel, ultimately to yourself, and not just to others, but to yourself. And it's not just marching against the world, but it's marching against the Creator. And so that is how Blake captured the sense of what we call the gospel.
I think there's a bit of foreshadowing. We'll come in a few moments to talking about silence and beauty of sort of cruelty and really marching against our Creator, as you just put it. I'd like to play a short video. It's called Golden Sea. When after Mako graduated from Bucknell, he went for, was it 4 or 5 years?
6.5 years.
6.5 years. Essentially in an old school way of apprenticing himself to learn a dying, if I'm correct in saying this, ancient Japanese art called Nihonga, which, if I understand it, you can correct us, but takes valuable minerals, including gold, and grinds them down. You make your own paint. You don't go to an art store. You literally grind it and it makes it. Could you briefly tell us what Nihonga is, and then we'll cue the video?
Sure. Nihonga is Japanese-style paintings. It goes back to 15th century Japan. The Japanese have cultivated and refined Chinese and Korean ways of painting into Japan. And so Japanese history of art goes way back, but particular Japanese idiosyncratic way of painting begins around that time, 1600s. And so it's a way, it's an ecosystem of artisans helping the artists to create. So they have paper makers and brush makers and pigment shop owners who are helping you to express the best expression possible. And
it's fascinating.
It's also what I call slow art, because it's not as fast as acrylic drawing, or you can speed up any kind of paint. But with this, you're water-based technique. So you're working with nature to produce color. Sometimes the ones that will be shown at the Museum of Bible, one painting of Matthew frontispiece, it has over 80 layers before 80 layers before I start to work on it. So it's this methodical, slow, every day you go into the studio, and it literally takes a long time just to get to a point where you can start painting. So it's a way to slow down for me, but it's also technique that has been passed down from 17th century on. And again, this type of the materials used are endangered, really, almost extinct. So I'm trying to raise awareness of this beautiful craft form of Japan that has been around for centuries and now.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Your work has sometimes been described as having both depth and kindness.
Yeah, I was stunned when he said that. That was my mentor, professor, who you rarely talk about your work with, like you talk about it, but not in that sense. That was,
as I think about this, and I think about masks, many of us are in jobs that feel void of meaning, feel void of beauty, feel void of kindness.
Yes.
We go to our workplace with a pit in our stomach sometimes. I mean, many people do enjoy their work and in the main, but many don't. How can seeing the world through your eyes as an artist, and an artist who's also a person of faith, how can that help people in a different space?
Yeah, so you look at some of the organizational psychology materials coming out, Adam Grant, for example, right? Yeah. Give and take. We're starting to see the bigger picture of how human relationships and work can embed itself in the totality of who you are, you know, not just a segment, right? And so empathy, for example, he found out is something that we used to think in the workplace that you have to discard. You know, it's a Darwinian reality, right? Yeah. And you have to beat out the others. But it turns out that empathy is very important in the workplace, not in the way that is commonly thought, but the selective emotional intelligences. Without that, you cannot become a leader. Right. And so art seems to me taps into that selective, emotional intelligence. It is exactly that the artists are training, and yet what gets in the way is that ego that doesn't allow for your gift to be dispersed, given away. Given away in the world. And somehow, we can have debates about why this is so, but art doesn't do well when it is only in the self. It only works well if it's given away to the world in what somebody called gift economy. In art, there's a market economy and gift economy simultaneously at work.
Unpack those a bit.
Yeah, so gift economy is an idea that poet Louis Hyde has written extensively about in his wonderful book called The Gift. It is a book that I give to young artists.
No pun intended, you give.
Yeah, I give. Yeah, that's the gift that I give to young artists when I start to mentor them. That's the first book I give them. Because it really identifies something that the market economy has missed, and we keep throwing the gift economy of artists and even this traditional crafts, poets, what they write about, these useless things in the world that turns out to be essential. And the reason why these poetry and art and theater and dance exist outside of the marketplace, but there's nothing wrong with putting them in the marketplace. But if we forget that they live outside of it, then we end up dehumanizing the very souls that created them. There are many examples. We can go into thousands of examples analyzing this, but the quick example is Emily Dickinson, who's never really published. The only time she published, the editor in Boston took out her dashes, which was the most important part of her poem to her, and forced her half rhymes became forced full rhymes, so it killed the poetry. Now she never published again. So this is what the market does to an artist's heart. Vincent van Gogh, very similar tale on the other side of the ocean. So we have all these examples today of literally artists that we see as one of the greatest gifts of the civilization, who was never able to shift over to the market economy. But because they stayed true to the gift economy side, their art literally continues to give away inspiration. So you can stand in front of Starry Night today in MoMA, and you still get that giving away of self that Vincent was able to do. He was literally loving people through his work.
So how do you, because you're unusual, sometimes people don't know your name or the world of art, and I'll mention you, and then it'll come up in conversation. And I'll say, Mako is really unusual. He's a commercially successful artist who's alive. So how do you, in your own disciplines, you're thriving in both the market economy and also the gift economy. Yeah. How do you do that? And how do I do that if I were back in my old job working on Wall Street?
Actually, I think all successful people do this well. But artists have to learn to be entrepreneurs. And I didn't know how to do that except by trying and failing many times. But the key thing is...
Because being an entrepreneur is also a creative act.
Absolutely. It's parallels are artistic creation, except you're putting yourself in a market economy.
Yeah, true.
Right? So you have to retain this your true self in the gift economy side, but you are using the leverage. What I would think is this invisible capitals, right? That not the hard reality of bottom line thinking of whether it be material resources or financial resources. You're relying on creative resources. And you can also rely on relational capital, relational resources. And artists have the capacity to enlarge both of them. And when you think about it, the only limited thing, capital, is the material resources. The creative resource, creative capital, and relational capital are infinite.
Right. And those exist also in the market economy.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And if the market economy starts to use that, as in case of social media, right? You're using relational capital to embed itself in a market capital. As long as you don't lose the original relational, then it can work to enlarge that capacity. And I think we're starting to discover how technology can actually help us to do that. Now, as an artist, I had to figure out how to sustain and grow as an artist without selling my soul to the system, right? So they're in a different market system, a gallery system, or music industry or whatever. You have to do there are specific things that you can do to guide people through that, and it keeps changing. The rule book is never the same, so you have to keep learning and you have to keep discovering. But I found that one of the greatest gifts of an artist is in when the future is murky, when there's crisis, when things are disrupted. That's the best time to be an artist. So I love challenges when it comes to crisis, management or whatever you want to call it. When things, with experiencing this tectonic shift in education, for example. For the seminary is going through this terrific change from a seminary that is training pastors, and there were thousands of young people who wanted to be pastors. That's diminishing today, and half of the graduates of Fuller are no longer going into church, but going back into the world. So this shift has to account for how do you train people as Christians to go back into the workforce, and you should be a professor this new platform, and maybe you will be, because that is precisely how seminary education has changed. Now, it's disruptive because it causes people a lot of anxiety. The old system, old wineskins breaking apart, and there's no nice way of transitioning into the new. So it is very difficult for people who are used to the old system. But for an artist, I look at that and I see all sorts of gaps, right, developing, as a good business person will do. And they see that, oh my goodness, this is hard, but there are all these opportunities.
It's fascinating saying, because if you were to strike the word artist out of everything you just said, I could see that fitting for a lot of people in the corporate world, whether it's entrepreneurial space or intrapreneurial space, that when there's a crisis or a problem, the market shifts, something moves, that the real elite gifted players, the artists, if you will, will figure out new instruments, they'll figure out new methodologies, new things, and many of them fail, and sometimes you get fired for it. They also tend to have a high EQ, that they have a compassion with people. They can be hard driving and intense. But it's similar. Probably the one difference, I don't think I know any investment bankers who their self-image is to start from the place of being an artist, where you are one, even though they might be doing that. I was just in Silicon Valley a couple weeks ago, the big company, one of the top 10 firms out there, and they were talking all about disruptive technologies. And I interviewed one person, and he talked about writing beautiful code.
Yes.
Writing beautiful
Yes,
code. And
yes.
he said, I'm slower than everybody else, but I write the most beautiful code in the Valley.
Right. And that takes integrated intelligence to do that. You know, you have to know algorithm to do that. And that's why, education that accounts for all of the above, really is important today, because you can't get out of the box unless you can see from history and literature and art. This experience of beauty actually brings us out of ourselves. Dr. Elaine Scarry, who is a Harvard graduate school, she teaches a graduate seminar on beauty, has written that our experience of beauty forces us to admit our own errors.
The experience of beauty forces us to admit our own errors. Wow.
That there is something transcendent, something larger than ourselves. So the world that we created has been too small in the box. But when you experience something beautiful that forces us to admit our own errors, takes us out of that box, and whatever the mystery, result of that, we get out of the box and we start exploring. And that's the capacity we have to develop in order to overcome many failures and many disruptions in our lives.
So we talk about in GLF, ethics is part of what we think about. Dan, is it possible to cue up that next slide? This is an advertisement. The context is O'Hare Airport. It's 2002, right after Arthur Anderson and Enron went down. And their tagline is, "This is the only way we see ethics." Obviously, the play is black and white. And of course, if we could go back and forth, is that true? Is it not true? And many people, and I use this as an exercise in my teaching, invariably say, well, ethics, it's the gray zone that's the problem. So, Mako, I say this to Mako once, and what was your response?
Actually, we need to think in colors.
Yeah, he pushed me back and said, no, wait, there's colors in this. It's not, gray limits our thinking.
Yes.
And he pushed me to find sort of, are there not creative, beautiful solutions as opposed to rigid boxes as in the black and white?
Yeah. And, so it's the world of interdependence, right? So the color wheel, if you mix all the colors together, it does get dark and black and muddy first. But gray is a color, and black and white is, white is this fully saturated color, right? So you're talking about this gradation, that reductionism of modernism has forced us to see things in black and white. So we see problem solving that way.
Right.
It's you're right or wrong, but in reality, life doesn't work that way. Yeah. Now, you can lament that and say, well, we live in a gray zone and ambiguity and all that. But really, to me, it's an opportunity, because this is full of color. You got all these interdependent things happening, and if you know color theory, you can actually get creative, because you have an opportunity to create something new out of the palette. So
create something new out of the palette. I like that. So I want to talk briefly about your book, Silence and Beauty. Yeah. I'm also mindful of time and want us to have some chance for questions. Do you want to cue the video up that we have, or do you want to just talk through some of the still photos?
I think we can talk about it.
Dan, could you bring up the I invite you, and we'll send out the link to look at this. It's extraordinary. We position what this book is and what it does, because
if you go
in some ways, I think it just ties to the times we're in right now.
Yeah. So if you go to silenceandbeauty.com, you will see all these videos, and we're going to show one, but you can go home and look at the one. And this came out of my book, Silence and Beauty, which was written in response to Shusaku Endo's Silence. This masterpiece of 20th century Japanese literature came out in 1965.
And what was he chronicling in Silence?
So before I say that, I just want to mention that this was a major motion picture by Martin Scorsese. movie, and I was
you were
asked to be
special advisor
to the film. So I read the early script. I was very impressed with what Martin Scorsese did.
But you could say he refers to him as Marty when we're alone.
Yes,
so
Marty.
You and Marty.
Yes, Marty.
Go ahead.
Marty and I. Yeah. But the theme of silence takes place in 17th century Japan, when Japan has just outlawed Christianity.
And there were a fair number of Christians at the time, right?
Yes, in 1660 there was 300,000 Christians. And in Kyoto, that would have been about 20-25% of the population. You can argue that Japan was a Christian nation with many warlords and even feudal powers to be that would be at least friendly to Christianity. Mm-hmm. But then immediately after that, this horrible persecution began because of several factors. And silence takes place in 1600s, where the last priest in Japan was known to have apostatized, forced to. So these young priests, played by Liam Neeson, Father Ferreira, and two young priests, Andrew Garfield and Adam Driver, Father Rodriguez and Father Garupe, lands in Nagasaki, the southern tip of Japan, and begins their journey of darkness into this landscape.
So essentially, it's a hellish experience of people being tortured, forced to apostatize, convert.
Yes. Yeah.
And talk about something called fume. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Right.
And do you have another slide?
Next slide. You keep going. There you go. So this is a fumie, literally translated stepping block, which was designed by one of the magistrates, probably in consultation with Father Ferreira, the apostate priest, to identify hidden Christians.
Identify hidden Christians.
Yes.
Okay.
So persecuted Christians will go into hiding. Mm-hmm. And they will be, just part of the village, and they would deny that they believe in Christ. So they would line these people up by the beach, and then suspected people will be forced to step on the fumie of image of Virgin Mary and Christ, or Christ on the cross. And so I saw these original fumies made by the first magistrate order that was given in early 1600s, done by Yusuke Hagiwara in Nagasaki. And this metalsmith created, this is one of the original pieces. And to me, my first encounter with them was in studying 17th century Japanese art. And I had just been baptized in Christian faith. I walked into a National Museum, and there was this corner room where 19 of these were lined up, and fumies, and I didn't know what they were. And I read the description, and it talked about Endo's book, Silence, and the history of Christian persecution. And it was as if God spoke to me and said, Mako, this is why I brought you into Japan. This is your heritage. This is your faith. This is your true baptism.
Wow.
What is haunting about these, as you can see, is that all of the fumies are worn smooth. So many years, 250 years of persecution. Every New Year's Day, villagers were forced to line up in the either in a temple or in the beaches, and forced to recant. Literally step on, sometimes spit on the image, and by your reaction, you could be identified and be arrested.
Wow. So that begs a really big question you ask. Do you mind sharing that question? It's a painful one, even to think about.
It was a painful journey, painful book to write, but particularly in regards to fumie. So the question that kept on recurring for our times is what fumie am I stepping on today? And what is that And a journalist asked me, being interviewed about this book, and so what is the Fumie of our time? And I said, well, go back to the last election. not this one, but year before. Everybody compromised something, right? To pull that lever or not pull it.
Yeah.
We're in this untenable situation where idealism and even the ideologies have broken down so completely. And there's no persecution, and we do that. So what if there is persecution? What kind of things will we compromise? And, I can say as a Christian leader, no, I'm going to stand tall and I'm going to not step on the Fumie. But what if your brothers and sisters are getting tortured because you won't step on the Fumie?
Because they would play that mental game with you.
Yeah. So then what? What is the right thing? What is the Christ-like thing to do?
Yeah.
Well, Endo says in commenting on his writing that I write about things that there is no answer to. That's my job as a novelist. I'm not writing to problem, solve. I'm writing to express this deeply human reality that exists in our souls, in our hearts. And by exposing them, I'm hoping to bring to light God's grace in that process. Now, so silence was misunderstood. Many times people think it's about silence of God. And so for those of you who have not read the book or seen the movie, I would only say that what Endo said, which is, I did not write about the silence of God. I wrote about this great voice of God speaking through silence and suffering.
The voice of God speaking through silence and suffering. Right. And you talk about a third way. Let's talk about that and then open it up to conversation.
Yeah. So as I thought about this and really walked the difficult path of understanding historical trauma and the trauma of our times and faith and inability for us today to understand color, see in color. We see things in black and white, or we think it's
your way or my way.
Yeah, exactly. You're either a winner or you're a loser.
Yeah.
And I thought what Endo was describing was the failure of Western imperialistic, categorical post-Enlightenment thinking to see in color, to force you to create, first of all, false dichotomies all the time. And to force you to choose between the two, and so reason and faith is one.
Taking false dichotomies and we're forced in one hat. Yeah.
Right. Emotions versus rationalism. These are things that we automatically assume, which is not really true. So my friend who's a philosopher calls this a need for epistemological therapy. We don't have to go there. But there is a whole, thinking behind the thinking, right? That forces us to think this way, to create our own fumies, to force people to step on them. And so I advocate for a third way. Now, I don't know what that is exactly in terms of politics or business or even in art, but I think it is the way that Endo lived and wrote, and it's a way that I certainly have been thinking a lot about as an artist.
And so essentially after intense suffering, you see the potential for beauty.
Yes. And that journey earns the right to be missional. For the first time. We go out.
What do you mean by missional?
Well, missional meaning, so Father Rodriguez comes from the West, Jesuit-trained missionary who is the best of the best, trained by the best. Billy Graham of his time has gone to Japan. But really he fails. He fails miserably. He ends up entrapping himself in this dichotomy. And at the end of the book, he actually comes out of it, although it's a very subtle thing that very few people recognize. Andrew Garfield gets it in the movie. So watch him at the end of the film. He was heavily criticized by US critics about this, but he literally disappears. His ego is gone. It's not going to win him Oscars when you do that. But he's a method actor, so he literally became a Jesuit priest for 4 months, went through training and lived that lifestyle throughout the set until the end. And he captures something I think is quite magical on screen that has rarely been captured. So if you see the movie, check out that last 20 minutes.
That's a great insight.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. The entire project was surrounded itself around John 11:35. It's the shortest passage in the entire Bible. Jesus wept, yes. So if you have to memorize scripture, that's the verse to select.
That's the one in Sunday school. You get some quick points.
That's right. But it's the most profound. I mean, explain to me why Jesus wept. He didn't have to. He went to Bethany to raise Lazarus from the grave, and he told his disciples, "I'm going to show God's power here." He told Martha, "I'm the resurrection and life." So why, in meeting with Mary, did he weep? He wasted time because Mary needed that. But I think profoundly we need that today. It's not just about fixing the problem. Jesus can't fix the problem. But it's about this level of empathy, right, that reaches deep into our souls and says, you need my presence more than my miracles. You need me. And therefore, I'm going to waste time with you in your sorrow, in your suffering. And to me, that's the most important passage in the entire Bible. So I imagine myself literally painting with Christ's tears every day. I just ask the Lord to help me do that. And so that journey was really extraordinary. It was revealing. It was challenging. It was so many things. But this is a product that came out of that journey.
Mako, you've given us that gift tonight of the unexpected, the distinct, the different.
Yeah.
Your way of thinking about culture care instead of culture wars, and that beauty and honesty and integrity can even exist in the hard-nosed for-profit business world.
Yeah.
So on behalf of all of GLF, thank you very much. How about a round of applause?